Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, there was a sweet little girl. Everyone who saw her liked her, but most of all, her grandmother, who did not know what to give the child next. Once, she gave her a little cap made of red velvet, because it suited her so well, and she wanted to wear it all the time. She came to be known as Little Red Riding Hood. One day her mother said to her, "Come, Little Red Riding Hood. Here is a piece of cake and a bottle of wine. Take them to your grandmother. Say, she's sick and weak and they will do her well. Mind your manners and give her my greetings. Behave yourself on the way, and do not leave the path, or you might fall down and break the glass. And then there will be nothing for your sick grandmother." Little Red Riding Hood promised to obey her mother. The grandmother lived out in the woods, a half-hour from the village. When Little Red Riding Hood entered the woods, a wolf came up to her. She didn't know what a wicked animal he was, and was not afraid of him. "Good day to you, Little Red Riding Hood." "Thank you, wolf." "Where are you going so early, Little Red Riding Hood?" "To grandmother's." "And what are you carrying under your apron?" "Grandmother is sick and weak, and I am taking her some cake and wine. We baked yesterday, and they should give her strength." "Little Red Riding Hood, just where does your grandmother live?" "Her house is a good quarter-hour from here in the woods, under the 3 large oak trees. There's a hedge of hazel bushes there. You must know the place," said Little Red Riding Hood. The wolf thought to himself, "Now there is a tasty bite for me. Just how are you going to catch her?" Then he said, "Listen, Little Red Riding Hood. Haven't you seen the beautiful flowers that are blossoming in the woods? Why don't you go and take a look? And I don't believe you can hear how beautifully the birds are singing. You are walking along as though you were on your way to school in the village. It is very beautiful in the woods." Little Red Riding Hood opened her eyes and saw the sunlight breaking through the trees and how the ground was covered with beautiful flowers. She thought, "If I take a bouquet to grandmother, she will be very pleased. Anyway, it is still early, and I'll be home on time." And she ran off into the woods looking for flowers. Each time she picked one, she thought that she could see an even more beautiful one a little way off, and she ran after it, going further and further into the woods. But the wolf ran straight to the grandmother's house and knocked on the door. "Who's there?" "Little Red Riding Hood. I'm bringing you some cake and wine. Open the door for me." "Just press the latch," called out the grandmother. "I'm too weak to get up." The wolf pressed the latch and the door opened. He stepped inside, went straight to the grandmother's bed, and ate her up. Then he took her clothes, put them on, and put her cap on his head. He got into her bed and pulled the curtains shut. Little Red Riding Hood had run after flowers and did not continue on her way to grandmother's until she had gathered all that she could carry. When she arrived, she found, to her surprise, that the door was open. She walked into the parlour, and everything looked so strange that she thought, "Oh my God, why am I so afraid? I usually like it at grandmother's." Then she went to the bed and pulled back the curtains. Grandmother was lying there with her cap pulled down over her face and looking very strange. "Oh, grandmother, what big ears you have, all the better to hear you with. Oh, grandmother, what big eyes you have, all the better to see you with. Oh, grandmother, what big hands you have, all the better to grab you with. Oh, grandmother, what a horribly big mouth you have, all the better to eat you with." And with that, he jumped out of bed, jumped on top of poor little Red Riding Hood, and ate her up. As soon as the wolf had finished this tasty bite, he climbed back into bed, fell asleep, and began to snore very loudly. A huntsman was just passing by. He thought it strange that the old woman was snoring so loudly, so he decided to take a look. He stepped inside, and in the bed there lay the wolf that he had been hunting for such a long time. "He has eaten the grandmother, but perhaps she still can be saved. I won't shoot him," thought the huntsman. So he took a pair of scissors and cut open his belly. He had cut only a few strokes when he saw the red cap shining through. He cut a little more, and the girl jumped out and cried, "Oh, I was so frightened. It was so dark inside the wolf's body." And then the grandmother came out alive as well. Then little Red Riding Hood fetched some large, heavy stones. They filled the wolf's body with them, and when he woke up and tried to run away, the stones were so heavy that he fell down dead. The three of them were happy. The huntsman took the wolf's pelt, the grandmother ate the cake, and drank the wine that Little Red Riding Hood had brought. And Little Red Riding Hood thought to herself, "As long as I live, I will never leave the path and run off into the woods by myself if Mother tells me not to." Hansel and Gretel. Near a great forest there lived a poor woodcutter and his wife and his 2 children. The boy's name was Hansel, and the girl's Gretel. They had very little to bite or to sup, and once, when there was great dearth in the land, the man could not even gain the daily bread. As he lay in bed one night thinking of this, and turning and tossing, he sighed heavily and said to his wife, "What will become of us? We cannot even feed our children. There is nothing left for ourselves." "I will tell you what, husband," answered the wife. "We will take the children early in the morning into the forest where it is thickest. We will make them a fire, and we will give each of them a piece of bread. Then we will go to our work and leave them alone. They will never find the way home again, and we shall be quit of them." "No, wife," said the man, "I cannot do that. I cannot find in my heart to take my children into the forest and to leave them there alone. The wild animals would soon come and devour them." "Oh, you fool," said she, "then we will all 4 starve. You had better get the coffins ready." And she left him no peace until he consented. "But I really pity the poor children," said the man. The 2 children had not been able to sleep for hunger, and had heard what their stepmother had said to their father. Gretel wept bitterly and said to Hansel, "It is all over with us." "Do be quiet, Gretel," said Hansel, "and do not fret. I will manage something." And when the parents had gone to sleep, he got up, put on his little coat, opened the back door, and slipped out. The moon was shining brightly, and the white flints that lay in front of the house glistened like pieces of silver. Hansel stooped and filled the little pocket of his coat as full as it would hold. Then he went back again and said to Gretel, "Be easy, dear little sister, and go to sleep quietly. God will not forsake us," and laid himself down again in his bed. When the day was breaking, and before the sun had risen, the wife came and awakened the two children, saying, "Get up, you lazy bones. We are going into the forest to cut wood." Then she gave each of them a piece of bread and said, "That is for dinner, and you must not eat it before then, for you will get no more." Gretel carried the bread under her apron, for Hansel had his pockets full of the flints. Then they set off all together on their way to the forest. When they had gone a little way, Hansel stood still and looked back towards the house. And this he did again and again, till his father said to him, "Hansel, what are you looking at? Take care not to forget your legs." "Oh, father," said Hansel, "I am looking at my little white kitten, who is sitting up on the roof to bid me good-bye." "You young fool," said the woman, "that is not your kitten, but the sunshine on the chimney-pot." Of course, Hansel had not been looking at his kitten, but had been taking every now and then a flint from his pocket and dropping it on the road. When they reached the middle of the forest, the father told the children to collect wood to make a fire to keep them warm. And Hansel and Gretel gathered brushwood enough for a little mountain G, and it was set on fire, and when the flame was burning quite high, the wife said, "Now lie down by the fire, and rest yourselves, you children, and we will go and cut wood, and when we are ready we will come and fetch you." So Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire, and at noon they each ate their pieces of bread. They thought their father was in the wood all the time, as they seemed to hear the strokes of the axe, but really it was only a dry branch hanging to a withered tree that the wind moved to and fro. So, when they had stayed there a long time, their eyelids closed with weariness, and they fell fast asleep. When at last they woke, it was night, and Gretel began to cry and said, "How shall we ever get out of this wood?" But Hansel comforted her, saying, "Wait a little while longer until the moon rises, and then we can easily find the way home." And when the full moon got up, Hansel took his little sister by the hand and followed the way where the flint stones shone like silver, and showed them the road. They walked on the whole night through, and at the break of day they came to their father's house. They knocked at the door, and when the wife opened it and saw that it was Hansel and Gretel, she said, "You naughty children, why did you sleep so long in the wood? We thought you were never coming home again." But the father was glad, for it had gone to his heart to leave them both in the woods alone. Not very long after that there was again great scarcity in those parts, and the children heard their mother say at night in bed to their father, "Everything is finished up. We have only half a loaf, and after that the tale comes to an end. The children must be off." We will take them farther into the wood this time, so that they shall not be able to find the way back again. There is no other way to manage." The man felt sad at heart, and he thought, it would better to share one's last morsel with one's children. But the wife would listen to nothing that he said, but scolded and reproached him. "He who says A must say B too. And when a man has given in, once he has to do it a second time." But the children were not asleep and had heard all the talk. When the parents had gone to sleep, Hansel got up to go out and get more flintstones, as he did before, but the wife had locked the door, and Hansel could not get out. But he comforted his little sister and said, "Don't cry, Gretel, and go to sleep quietly, and God will help us." Early the next morning, the wife came and pulled the children out of bed. She gave them each a little piece of bread, less than before, and on the way to the wood Hansel crumbled the bread in his pocket and often stopped to throw a crumb on the ground. "Hansel, what are you stopping behind and staring for?" said the father. "I am looking at my little pigeon sitting on the roof to say goodbye to me," answered Hansel. "You fool," said the wife, "that is no pigeon, but the morning sun shining on the chimney pots." Hansel went on as before and strewed breadcrumbs all along the road. The woman led the children far into the wood, where they had never been before in all their lives. And again there was a large fire made, and the mother said, "Sit still there, you children, and when you are tired you can go to sleep. We are going into the forest to cut wood, and in the evening, when we are ready to go home, we will come and fetch you." So when noon came, Gretel shared her bread with Hansel, who had strewed his along the road. Then they went to sleep, and the evening passed, and no one came for the poor children. When they awoke, it was dark night, and Hansel comforted his little sister and said, "Wait a little, Gretel, until the moon gets up, then we shall be able to see the way home by the crumbs of bread that I have scattered along it." So when the moon rose, they got up, but they could find no crumbs of bread, for the birds of the woods and of the fields had come and picked them up. Hansel thought they might find the way all the same, but they could not. They went on all that night, and the next day from the morning until the evening. But they could not find the way out of the wood, and they were very hungry, for they had nothing to eat but the few berries they could pick up. And when they were so tired that they could no longer drag themselves along, they lay down under a tree and fell asleep. It was now the third morning since they had left their father's house. They were always trying to get back to it, but instead of that, they only found themselves farther in the wood. And if help had not soon come, they would have been starved. About noon, they saw a pretty snow-white bird sitting on a bough and singing so sweetly that they stopped to listen. And when he had finished, the bird spread his wings and flew before them, and they followed after him until they came to a little house, and the bird perched on the roof. And when they came nearer, they saw that the house was built of bread and roofed with cakes, and the window was of transparent sugar. "We will have some of this," said Hansel, "and make a fine meal. I will eat a piece of the roof, Gretel, and you can have some of the window. That will taste sweet." So Hansel reached up and broke off a bit of the roof, just to see how it tasted, and Gretel stood by the window and gnawed at it. Then they heard a thin voice call out from inside, "Nibble, nibble like a mouse, who is nibbling at my house?" And the children answered, "Never mind, it is the wind." And they went on eating, never disturbing themselves. Hansel, who found that the roof tasted very nice, took down a great piece of it, and Gretel pulled out a large, round window pane and sat her down and began upon it. Then the door opened, and an aged woman came out, leaning upon a crutch. Hansel and Gretel felt very frightened and let fall what they had in their hands. The old woman, however, nodded her head and said, "Ah, my dear children, how come you here? You must come indoors and stay with me. You will be no trouble." So she took them each by the hand and led them into her little house. And there they found a good meal laid out, of milk and pancakes, with sugar, apples, and nuts. After that, she showed them 2 little white beds, and Hansel and Gretel laid themselves down on them, and thought they were in heaven. The old woman, although her behavior was so kind, was a wicked witch, who lay in wait for children, and had built the little house on purpose to entice them. When they were once inside, she used to kill them, cook them, and eat them, and then it was a feast day with her. The witch's eyes were red, and she could not see very far, but she had a keen scent, like the beasts, and knew very well when human creatures were near. When she knew that Hansel and Gretel were coming, she gave a spiteful laugh and said triumphantly, "I have them, and they shall not escape me." Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she got up to look at them, and as they lay sleeping so peacefully with round rosy cheeks, she said to herself, "What a fine feast I shall have." Then she grasped Hansel with her withered hand and led him into a little stable and shut him up behind a grating, and call and scream as he might, it was no good. Then she went back to Gretel and shook her, crying, "Get up, lazy bones, fetch water and cook something nice for your brother. He is outside in the stable and must be fattened up, and when he is fat enough, I will eat him." Gretel began to weep bitterly, but it was of no use. She had to do what the wicked witch bade her. And so the best kind of victuals was cooked for poor Hansel, while Gretel got nothing but crab shells. Each morning the old woman visited the little stable and cried, "Hansel, stretch out your finger, that I may tell if you will soon be fat enough." Hansel, however, used to hold out a little bone, and the old woman, who had weak eyes, could not see what it was, and supposing it to be Hansel's finger, wondered very much that it was not getting fatter. When 4 weeks had passed and Hansel seemed to remain so thin, she lost patience and could wait no longer. "Now then, Gretel," cried she to the little girl, "be quick and draw water. Be Hansel fat or be he lean. Tomorrow I must kill and cook him." Oh, what a grief for the poor little sister to have to fetch water, and how the tears flowed down over her cheeks. "Dear God, pray help us," cried she. "If we had been devoured by wild beasts in the wood, at least we should have died together." "Spare me your lamentations," said the old woman. "They are of no avail." Early next morning, Gretel had to get up, make the fire, and fill the kettle. "First we will do the baking," said the old woman. "I knave heated the oven already and kneaded the dough." She pushed poor Gretel towards the oven, out of which the flames were already shining. "Creep in," said the witch, "and see if it is properly hot, so that the bread may be baked." And Gretel, once in, she meant to shut the door upon her and let her be baked, and then she would have eaten her. But Gretel perceived her intention and said, "I don't know how to do it. How shall I get in?" "Stupid goose," said the old woman. "The opening is big enough, do you see? I could get in myself." And she stooped down and put her head in the oven's mouth. Then Gretel gave her a push so that she went in farther, and she shut the iron door upon her and put up the bar. Oh, how frightfully she howled! But Gretel ran away and left the wicked witch to burn miserably. Gretel went straight to Hansel, opened the stable door and cried, "Hansel, we are free! The old witch is dead." Then out flew Hansel like a bird from its cage as soon as the door is opened. How rejoiced they both were! How they fell each on the other's neck, and danced about and kissed each other, and as they had nothing more to fear, they went over all the old witch's house, and in every corner there stood chests of pearls and precious stones. "This is something better than flint stones," said Hansel, as he filled his pockets, and Gretel, thinking she also would like to carry something home with her, filled her apron full. "Now, away we go," said Hansel, "if we only can get out of the witch's wood." When they had journeyed a few hours, they came to a great piece of water. "We can never get across this," said Hansel. "I see no stepping stones and no bridge." "And there is no boat either," said Gretel. "But here comes a white duck. If I ask her, she will help us over." So she cried, "Duck, duck, here we stand, Hansel and Gretel on the land. Stepping stones and bridge we lack. Carry us over on your nice white back." And the duck came accordingly, and Hansel got upon her and told his sister to come too. "No," answered Gretel, "that would be too hard upon the duck. We can go separately, one after the other." And that was how it was managed, and after that they went on happily until they came to the wood, and the way grew more and more familiar, till at last they saw in the distance their father's house. Then they ran till they came up to it, rushed in at the door, and fell on their father's neck. The man had not had a quiet hour since he left his children in the wood, but the wife was dead. And when Gretel opened her apron, the pearls and precious stones were scattered all over the room, and Hansel took one handful after another out of his pocket. Then was all care at an end, and they lived in great joy together. Puss in Boots. A miller had 3 sons. His mill, a donkey and a tomcat. The sons had to grind, the donkey had to get grain and carry flour away, and the cat had to catch the mice away. When the miller died, the 3 brothers divided their inheritance. The oldest received the mill, the second the donkey, and the third the tomcat. Further was nothing left for him. Thereon he was sad and spoke to himself, "But I have gotten all the worst. My oldest brother can mill, my second can ride on his donkey. What can I start with the tomcat? Let me make a pair of fur gloves out of his pelt, so it's over." "Listen," said the tomcat, who had understood everything, what he said. "You do not need to kill me to get a pair of bad gloves from my pelt. Let only a pair of boots be made for me, that I can go out and be seen among the people. Then you will soon be helped." The miller's son was in wonderment that the tomcat so spoke, but because the shoemaker just walked by, he called him in and let a pair of boots be measured for him. When they were ready, the tomcat put them on, took a sack, made the bottom of the same full of corn, but on the top a string, with which one could pull it closed. Then he threw it over his back and went on two legs, like a human, out the door. In those days reigned a king in the land. He liked to eat partridges so much there was a need that none were to be gotten. The whole forest was full, but they were so shy that no hunter could reach them. The tomcat knew that, and considered to do his matter better. When he came into the forest, he made the sack open, spread the corn apart, but the cord he laid into the grass and led it behind a hedge. There he hid himself, snuck around, and lurked. The partridges soon came running, and one after the other hopped into the sack. When a good quantity was in it, the tomcat pulled the cord closed, ran to and twisted their heads around. Then he threw the sack over his shoulder and went straight away to the king's palace. The watch cried, "Halt! Where to?" "To the king," answered the tomcat quickly. "Are you crazed? A tomcat to the king." "Just let him go," said another. "The king has often boredom. Maybe the tomcat makes him amused with his humming and spinning." When the tomcat came in front of the king, he made a reverence and said, "My Herr the Graf." With that he named his long and distinguished name, lets himself be recommended to the Herr King, and sends him these partridges that he just caught in slings. The king, astonished over the beautiful fat partridges, knew not out of pleasure how to contain himself, and commanded that the tomcat be given as much gold out of the treasure chamber into his sack as he could carry. "That bring to your heron, and thank him again many times for his gift." Supported his head and his hand, and thought that he had spent his last for the tomcat's boots, and what large things will he be able to bring back. Thereon the tomcat stepped in, threw the sack from his hack, untied it open, and shook the gold in front of the miller. "There you have something for the hoots. The king also greets you and says many thanks to you." The miller was glad over the wealth, without understanding rightly how it came to be. But the tomcat, as he took off his boots, told him everything. Then he said, "You do have money enough now, but it should not stay with that. Tomorrow I will put my boots on again. You will become richer still." I also told the king that you are a Graf. On the next day the torn cat went, as he had said, well booted to hunting again, and brought the king a rich catch. So it went all days, and the tomcat brought gold home all days, and was so popular as one by the king that he was allowed to come in and go out and prowl around in the palace where he wanted. One time the tomcat stood in the king's kitchen by the stove and warmed himself. Thereon came the coachman and cursed, "I wish king and the princess were at the executioner. I wanted to go to Wirtshaus and drink once and play cards. There I should drive them around at the lake." As the tomcat heard that, he snuck home and told his Herr. If a Graf you want to be and become rich, so come outside with me to the lake and bathe yourself therein." The miller did not know what he should say to that, but followed the tomcat, went with him, undressed splinter naked, and sprang into the water. But the tomcat took his clothes, carried them away, and hid them. No sooner was he finished with that, thereon came the king driving by. The tomcat immediately began, pathetically to lament, "Ah, all-merciful king, Mane Hair bathed himself here in the lake. Thereon a thief came and stole his clothes that lay on the shore. Now the Herr Graf is in the water and cannot come out, and if he stays in longer he will catch cold and die." When the king heard that, he called help, and one of his people had to chase back, and of the king's clothes bring hack. The Herr Graf put on the magnificent clothes, and because the king threw anyway for the partridges that he thought to have received from him, held his worth, so he had to sit with them in the carriage. The princess was also not upset over it, because the Graf was young and handsome, and she liked him quite well. But the tomcat went ahead and came to a large grass field where over 100 people were making hay. "Who does this grass field belong to, you people?" said the tomcat. The great magician said, "Listen, the king will soon drive by. When he asks who the grass field belongs to, so answer, 'The Grafen,' and if you do not do that, you will all be struck dead." Thereon the tomcat went further and came to a grain field, so large that no one could oversee it. There stood more than 200 people and cut the grain. "Whose grain is this, you people?" The magician said, "Listen, the king will drive by now. When he asks who the grain belongs to, so answer, 'The Grafen,' and if you do not do that, you will all be struck dead." Finally the tomcat came to a magnificent forest. There stood more than 300 people, felled the big oaks, and made wood. "Whose forest is this, you people?" The magician said, "Listen, the king will drive by now. When he asks who the forest belongs to, so answer, 'The Grafen,' and if you do not do that, you will all be killed." The tomcat went still further. The people all looked after him, and because he looked so wonderly, and as a human walked in the boots, they were afraid of him. He soon came to the magician's palace, stepped boldly in and in front of him. The magician looked at him contemptuously and asked him what he wanted. The tomcat made a reverence and said, "I have heard that you could transform yourself into every animal you chose by your own will. What a hound, fox, or even wolf concerns, that I will well believe. But of an elephant that seems to me quite impossible, and therefore I have come to convince myself." The magician said proudly, "That is a trifle to me," and in that wink of an eye was transformed into an elephant. "That is much, but also in a lion." "That is also nothing," said the magician, and stood as a lion in front of the tomcat. The tomcat made as if startled and cried, "That is unbelievable and unheard of. The same I would never had dreamt of coming into my thoughts. But more still, all else, it would be, if you could transform yourself into such a small animal, as a mouse is. You can certainly do more than any other magician in the world, but that will be certainly too high for you." The magician was very friendly from the sweet words and said, "Oja, dear catlet, that I can also," and sprang as a mouse around the room. The tomcat was after him, caught the mouse with one jump and ate him up. But the king was still driving around with the Grafen and the princess, and came to the large field. "Who does the hay belong to?" asked the king. "The Herr Grafen," cried all, as the tomcat had commanded them. "You have a pretty piece of land, Herr Graf," said he. Thereafter they came to the large grain field. "Who does the grain belong to, you people?" "The Herr Grafen." "Hey, Herr Graf, large, big estates. They're on to the forest. Who does the wood belong to, you people?" "The Herr Grafen." The king was astonished even more and said, "You must be a rich man, Herr Graf. I do not believe that I have such a magnificent forest." Finally they came to the palace. The tomcat stood on top of the stairs, and as the wagon stopped below, he sprang down, opened the door, and said, "Herr King, you came to the palace of my Herr, the Graf. This honors him, and makes him happy his life day long." The king stepped out and marveled at the magnificent building that was almost larger and more beautiful than his own palace. But the Graf led the princess up the stairs into the hall that was shimmering with gold and precious stones. Thereon the princess was promised to the Graf, and when the king died, he was king, and the booted tomcat became first minister. The Wolf and the 7 Young Kids. There was once an old goat who had 7 little ones, and was as fond of them as ever mother was of her children. One day she had to go into the wood to fetch food for them, so she called them all round her. "Dear children," said she, "I am going out into the wood, and while I am gone, be on your guard against the wolf, for if he were once to get inside, he would eat you up, skin, bones, and all. The wretch often disguises himself, but he may always be known by his hoarse voice and black paws." "Dear mother," answered the kids, "you need not be afraid. We will take good care of ourselves." And the mother bleated goodbye and went on her way with an easy mind. It was not long before someone came knocking at the house door and crying out, "Open the door, my dear children. Your mother is come back and has brought each of you something." But the little kids knew it was the wolf by the hoarse voice. "We will not open the door," cried they. "You are not our mother. She has a delicate and sweet voice, and your voice is hoarse. You must be the wolf." Then off went the wolf to a shop and bought a big lump of chalk and ate it up to make his voice soft. And then he came back, knocked at the house door and cried, "Open the door, my dear children. Your mother is here and has brought each of you something." But the wolf had put up his black paws against the window, and the kids, seeing this, cried out, "We will not open the door. Our mother has no black paws like you. You must be the wolf." The wolf then ran to a baker. "Baker," said he, "I am hurt in the foot. Please spread some dough over the place." And when the baker had plastered his feet, he ran to the miller. "Miller," said he, "strew me some white meal over my paws." But the miller refused, thinking the wolf must be meaning harm to someone. "If you don't do it," cried the wolf, "I'll eat you up." And the miller was afraid and did as he was told. And that just shows what men are. And now came the rogue, the 3rd time to the door, and knocked. "Open, children," cried he. "Your dear mother has come home and brought you each something from the wood." "First show us your paws," said the kids, "so that we may know if you are really our mother or not." And he put up his paws against the window, and when they saw that they were white, all seemed right, and they opened the door. And when he was inside, they saw it was the wolf. and they were terrified and tried to hide themselves. One ran under the table, the second got into the bed, the third into the oven, the fourth in the kitchen, the fifth in the cupboard, the sixth under the sink, the seventh in the clock case. But the wolf found them all and gave them short shrift. One after the other he swallowed down, all but the youngest, who was hid in the clock case. And so the wolf, having got what he wanted, strolled forth into the green meadows, and laying himself down under a tree, he fell asleep. Not long after, the mother goat came back from the wood, and oh, what a sight met her eyes! The door was standing wide open, table, chairs, and stools all thrown about, dishes broken, quilt and pillows torn off the bed. She sought her children, they were nowhere to be found. She called to each of them by name, but nobody answered until she came to the name of the youngest. "Here I am, mother," a little voice cried. "Here in the clock case." And so she helped him out, and heard how the wolf had come and eaten all the rest. And you may think how she cried for the loss of her dear children. At last, in her grief, she wandered out of doors, and the youngest kid with her. And when they came into the meadow, there they saw the wolf lying under a tree and snoring so that the branches shook. The mother goat looked at him carefully on all sides, and she noticed how something inside his body was moving and struggling. "Dear me," thought she, "can it be that my poor children that he devoured for his evening meal are still alive?" And she sent the little kid back to the house for a pair of shears, a needle and thread. Then she cut the wolf's body open, and no sooner had she made one snip than out came the head of one of the kids, and then another snip, and then one after the other. The 6 little kids all jumped out alive and well, for in his greediness the rogue had swallowed them down whole. How delightful this was! So they comforted their dear mother and hopped about like tailors at a wedding. "Now fetch some good hard stones," said the mother, "and we will fill his body with them as he lies asleep." And so they fetched some in all haste and put them inside him, and the mother sewed him up so quickly again that he was none the wiser. When the wolf at last awoke and got up, the stones inside him made him feel very thirsty, and as he was going to the brook to drink, they struck and rattled one against another. And so he cried out, "What is this I feel inside me knocking hard against my bones? How should such a thing betide me? They were kids, and now they're stones." So he came to the brook and stooped to drink, but the heavy stones weighed him down, so he fell over into the water and was drowned. And when the 7 little kids saw it, they came up running. "The wolf is dead! The wolf is dead!" they cried, and taking hands, they danced with their mother all about the place. Rapunzel. There once lived a man and his wife who had long wished for a child, but in vain. Now there was at the back of their house a little window which overlooked a beautiful garden full of the finest vegetables and flowers, but there was a high wall all round it, and no one ventured into it, for it belonged to a witch of great might, and of whom all the world was afraid. One day that the wife was standing at the window and looking into the garden, she saw a bed filled with the finest rampion, and it looked so fresh and green that she began to wish for some, and at length she longed for it greatly. This went on for days, and as she knew she could not get the rampion, she pined away and grew pale and miserable. Then the man was uneasy and asked, "What is the matter, dear wife?" "Oh," answered she, "I shall die unless I can have some of that rampion to eat that grows in the garden at the back of our house." The man, who loved her very much, thought to himself, "Rather than lose my wife, I will get some rampion, cost what it will." So in the twilight he climbed over the wall into the witch's garden, plucked hastily a handful of rampion, and brought it to his wife. She made a salad of it at once, and ate of it to her heart's content. But she liked it so much, and it tasted so good, that the next day she longed for it thrice as much as she had done before. If she was to have any rest, the man must climb over the wall once more. So he went. "Oh," answered he, "be merciful rather than just. I have only done it through necessity, for my wife saw your rampion out of the window and became possessed with so great a longing that she would have died if she could not have had some to eat." Then the witch said, "If it is all as you say, you may have as much rampion as you like, on one condition: the child that will come into the world must be given to me. It shall go well with the child, and I will care for it like a mother." In his distress of mind, the man promised everything. And when the time came when the child was born, the witch appeared, and giving the child the name of Rapunzel, which is the same as rampion, she took it away with her. Rapunzel was the most beautiful child in the world. When she was 12 years old, the witch shut her up in a tower in the midst of a— "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair!" Rapunzel had beautiful long hair that shone like gold. When she heard the voice of the witch, she would undo the fastening of the upper window, unbind the plaits of her hair, and let it down 20 ells. After they had lived thus a few years, it happened that as the king's son was riding through the wood, he came to the tower, and as he drew near, he heard a voice singing so sweetly that he stood still and listened. It was Rapunzel in her loneliness, trying to pass away the time with sweet songs. The king's son wished to go to her, and sought to find a door in the tower, but there was none. So he rode home, but the song had entered into his heart, and every day he went into the wood and listened to it. Once, as he was standing there under a tree, he saw how Rapunzel let down her long tresses, and how the witch climbed up by it and went into her, and he said to himself, "Since that is the ladder, I will climb it and seek my fortune." And the next day, as soon as it began to grow dusk, he went to the tower and cried, "Oh, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." And she let down her hair, and the king's son climbed up by it. Rapunzel was greatly terrified when she saw that a man had come into her, for she had never seen one before. But the king's son began speaking so kindly to her, and told how her singing had entered into his heart, so that he could have no peace until he had seen her herself. Then Rapunzel forgot her terror, and when he asked her to take him for her husband, and she said, "I would willingly go with you, but I do not know how I shall get out. When time comes, bring each time a silken rope, and I will make a ladder, and when it is quite ready, I will get down by it out of the tower, and you shall take me away on the horse." They agreed that he should come to her every evening, as the old woman came in the daytime. So the witch knew nothing of all this, until once Rapunzel said to her unwittingly, "Mother Gothel, how is it that you climb up here so slowly, and the king's son is with me in a moment?" "O wicked child," cried the witch, "what is this I hear? I thought I had hidden you from all the world, and now you have betrayed me." In her anger, she seized Rapunzel by her beautiful hair, struck her several times with her left hand, and then, grasping a pair of shears in her right, snip-snap, the beautiful locks lay on the ground. And she was so hard-hearted that she took Rapunzel and put her in a waste and desert place where she lived in great woe and misery. The same day on which she took Rapunzel away, she went back to the tower in the evening and made fast the severed locks of hair to the window hasp. And the king's son came and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel." "Aha!" cried she, mocking him. "You came for your darling, but the sweet bird sits no longer in the nest and sings no more. The cat has got her, and will scratch out your eyes as well. Rapunzel is lost to you, you will see her no more." The king's son was beside himself with grief, and in his agony he sprang from the tower. He escaped with life, but the thorns on which he fell put out his eyes. Then he wandered blind through the wood, eating nothing but roots and berries, and doing nothing but lament and weep for the loss of his dearest wife. So he wandered several years in misery, until at last he came to the desert place where Rapunzel lived with her twin children that she had borne, a boy and a girl.